The gavel cracked like a whip, silencing the murmurs in the courtroom, but it couldn't quiet the storm brewing in Marcus Tate's chest. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles whitening, as Judge Harlan's cold voice sliced through the air. "Mr. Tate, stand when addressing this court." The room froze, 100 eyes darting between the black veteran, his legs lost to a roadside bomb in Iraq, and the judge who seemed blind to the wheelchair before him. Marcus's jaw tightened, his dark eyes burning with a fire forged in battles both overseas and here, in this small Georgia town where his skin still drew whispers. He wasn't just a disabled veteran. He was a black man in a courtroom that felt more like a lion's den. The charge against him assaulting an officer was a lie spun from a late-night traffic stop, where a white cop's bruised ego turned a routine check into a violent arrest. Marcus had raised his hands, complied, but his prosthetic leg had slipped, and he'd fallen. The officer's response? A baton to Marcus's ribs and cuffs on his wrists. Now, here he was, facing a judge who demanded the impossible, as if his sacrifice for his country meant nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Marcus's lawyer, Sarah Coleman, a young public defender with fire in her veins, shot to her feet. "Your Honor, my client is physically unable to stand. He's a disabled veteran who served." "Enough!" Judge Harlan snapped, his face reddening. "This court demands respect, Ms. Coleman. If Mr. Tate cannot comply, he can face the consequences." The judge's words landed like a punch, and Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her notes. She'd seen prejudice before, but this was a new LOA judge weaponizing a man's disability to humiliate him. In the gallery, Marcus's sister, Lena, clutched her purse, her breath hitching. She'd driven 3 hours to be here, her faith in justice already worn thin by years of seeing her brother treated like less than human. Beside her, an older white man in a faded Vietnam vet cap muttered, "This ain't right." The sentiment rippled through the crowd, a mix of black and white faces, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. The tension was a live wire, ready to spark. Marcus lifted his chin, his voice steady but laced with defiance. "I fought for this country, Your Honor. Lost my legs for it. If standing's what you need to hear me, then you're not listening." His words cut through the room, raw and unyielding. A juror, a young black woman with braided hair, gasped softly, her eyes glistening. Even the bailiff, a stoic man who'd seen it all, shifted his weight, his face unreadable. Judge Harlan leaned forward, his gavel raised like a threat. "You will stand, Mr. Tate, or I'll hold you in contempt." The threat hung there, daring Marcus to break. Sarah's heart pounded. She knew this wasn't just about courtroom protocol. Harlan had a reputation, whispered in legal circles, for rulings that skewed against black defendants. This was personal, a power play rooted in something uglier than justice. Sarah stepped closer to Marcus, her voice low but fierce. "Don't let him break you. We'll fight this." Marcus gave a slight nod, but his eyes never left the judge. He'd faced death in war. He wouldn't bow to this. Not here, not now. The courtroom's silence grew deafening. Every breath held as if the room itself awaited an explosion. Lena's hands twisted her purse strap, her prayers silent but desperate. The Vietnam vet in the gallery leaned forward, his weathered face tight with anger. A young white woman in the back, a reporter scribbling notes, paused, her pen hovering as she sensed history unfolding. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Sarah cleared her throat, her voice rising to fill the void. "Your Honor, this demand is not only unreasonable but discriminatory. My client's disability is documented, and his service to this nation is undeniable. To punish him for his physical condition is an affront to justice." She turned to the gallery, her gaze sweeping over the jurors, the spectators, the bailiff. This courtroom should honor sacrifice, not mock it. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others whispering. The juror with braided hair sat taller, her eyes locked on Sarah. The Vietnam vet clapped once, loud enough to startle the room, and a few others joined in before Harlan's gavel slammed down again. "Order!" he barked, but his voice cracked, betraying a flicker of doubt. Marcus felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. He'd spent his life proving himself to his platoon, to his family, to a world that too often saw his skin before his soul. The officer's lie, the arrest, this trial, it was all part of the same fight. But he wasn't alone. Lena's unwavering presence, Sarah's fierce advocacy, even the scattered allies in the gallery, they were his platoon now. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice calm but resonant. "I've stood for this country in ways you'll never know. If you can't see that, maybe you're the one who needs to stand for something better than this." The words landed like a grenade, and the courtroom erupted. Lena clapped a hand over her mouth, tears spilling. The Vietnam vet stood, clapping louder, and others followed, black, white, young, old. The reporter's pen flew across her notebook, capturing every word. Harlan's face flushed crimson, his gavel trembling in his hand. "You're out of line, Mr. Tate," he shouted. But his voice was drowned by the growing applause. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "No, Your Honor, you're out of line. This trial isn't just about an assault charge, it's about whether this court respects the men and women who serve, regardless of their color or condition." The bailiff moved toward Marcus, as if to enforce the judge's threat, but hesitated when the Vietnam vet stepped into the aisle, arms crossed. "You touch that man, you answer to me," the vet growled. The bailiff froze, glancing at Harlan, who seemed to shrink behind his bench. The juror with braided hair stood, her voice shaking but clear. "This isn't justice. This is wrong." Another juror, an older white man, joined her, then another. The gallery buzzed, a chorus of voices rising, some in support, others in protest. The reporter scribbled faster, her headline already forming. "Disabled veteran defies judge in explosive courtroom standoff." Sarah seized the moment, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Your Honor, I move for a mistrial. Your conduct has prejudiced this case beyond repair." The words were a gauntlet thrown, and Harlan's eyes widened, caught off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The courtroom was no longer his. Marcus sat taller in his wheelchair, his heart pounding but his resolve unbroken. He'd faced worse than this: bullets, bombs, and bigotry that cut deeper than both. But this moment, with the room rising around him, felt different. It wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs. The applause grew louder, a wave crashing against the walls of prejudice. Lena stood, her voice breaking as she called out, "That's my brother!" The Vietnam vet pumped a fist, his cap askew. Even the bailiff stepped back, his face softening. Judge Harlan slammed his gavel again, but it was a hollow sound, drowned by the will of the room. Sarah leaned close to Marcus, her whisper urgent. "We've got them. Keep pushing." Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw fear, anger, hope, every emotion that made them human. This wasn't just about him. It was about every black man, every veteran, every person who'd been told they didn't belong. "Your Honor," Sarah continued, her voice steady, "if you hold my client in contempt for his disability, you'll be holding this entire courtroom in contempt. Look around. The people here see what's happening. They see injustice." She gestured to the gallery, where more spectators were standing, their faces a mosaic of defiance and solidarity. Harlan's gaze darted from Sarah to Marcus to the crowd, his authority unraveling with every second. He'd underestimated Marcus's strength, Sarah's tenacity, the crowd's hunger for something better. The gavel hung limp in his hand, a relic of a power he no longer held. Marcus spoke again, his voice quieter now but no less powerful. "I didn't fight for a country that demands I stand when I can't. I fought for one that lifts up those who fall." The words sank into the room, and for a moment, even Harlan seemed to falter. The juror with braided hair wiped her eyes, and the Vietnam vet nodded, his own eyes misty. The reporter's pen stopped, her story already bigger than she'd imagined. This wasn't just a trial, it was a mirror held up to a nation, forcing it to confront its flaws. And in that courtroom, on that sweltering Georgia day, Marcus Tate was no longer just a defendant. He was a symbol, a spark, a man who refused to be silenced. The courtroom pulsed with raw energy, a storm of human will that Judge Harlan could no longer contain. His gavel, once a symbol of absolute authority, now seemed like a child's toy, useless against the tide of voices rising in Marcus Tate's defense. The disabled black veteran sat resolute in his wheelchair, his dark eyes locked on the judge, unyielding. Sarah Coleman, his lawyer, stood beside him, her posture defiant, her legal pad clutched like a shield. The gallery, black, white, young, old, was a living testament to the moment, their murmurs and claps weaving a chorus of resistance. Harlan's face twitched, a vein pulsing at his temple. He'd built his career on control, on bending courtrooms to his will, but this one was slipping through his fingers. "Order!" he bellowed again, slamming the gavel so hard it skidded across the bench. The sound was sharp but fleeting, swallowed by the crowd's resolve. Sarah seized the opening, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Your Honor, you've made it clear this trial is tainted. Your demand for my client to stand is not just unreasonable, it's a deliberate act of bias. I renew my motion for a mistrial, and I demand an investigation into your conduct." The words landed like a thunderclap. A mistrial was one thing, but an investigation? That was a direct challenge to Harlan's legacy, a public accusation that could unravel his career. The gallery erupted again, some cheering, others gasping. The juror with braided hair, whose name was Keisha, nodded fiercely, her hands clasped as if in prayer. The Vietnam vet, whose cap read, "Semper Fi," shouted, "Damn right!" and the room fed off his fire. Marcus felt the weight of the moment, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. He'd never wanted Thisto be the center of a spectacle, to have his pain laid bare for strangers to judge. But he'd learned long ago that survival meant standing firm, even when the ground was gone. He glanced at his sister, Lena, whose tear-streaked face glowed with pride. She mouthed, "You got this." And he drew strength from her, from Sarah, from the strangers who saw him not as a defendant but as a man. Harlan's eyes darted to the bailiff, then to the crowd, then back to Marcus. For the first time, doubt flickered in his gaze. He was a man used to wielding power, but power was only as strong as the people who upheld it. And this room, this moment, was no longer his to command. "Ms. Coleman," he said, his voice strained, "your motion is noted, but this court will proceed. Mr. Tate, I'll ask you one last time, stand, or face contempt." The room held its breath. Sarah's hand grazed Marcus's shoulder, a silent signal of solidarity. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but resonant, carrying the weight of his truth. "Your Honor, I've stood for this country in ways that cost me everything, me legs, my peace, my trust in systems like this one. If you can't see that, you're not judging me. You're judging yourself." The gallery exploded. Lena leapt to her feet, clapping wildly, her voice breaking as she shouted, "That's right, Marcus." The Vietnam vet joined her, his weathered hands pounding together, and soon half the room was standing, their applause a roaring wave. The young reporter in the back, her notebook nearly full, scribbled furiously, her headline evolving. "Veterans' Defiance Sparks Courtroom Uprising." Even the bailiff, caught in the tide, stepped back, his hand resting on his belt instead of reaching for Marcus. Keisha, the juror, stood again, her voice trembling but clear. "This isn't justice, it's cruelty." Her words sparked another juror, a middle-aged white woman, to rise. "I agree," she said softly, her face flushed with emotion. "This isn't what I swore to uphold." The older white juror, who'd been silent until now, stood too, his voice gruff. "I've seen enough. This stops here." Harlan's face paled, his authority crumbling like dry clay. He opened his mouth, but Sarah cut him off, her voice rising with unyielding conviction. "Your Honor, this courtroom has spoken. The jurors, the people, they see what's happening. You can't ignore them. You can't ignore justice." She turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping over the faces, black and white, united in their outrage. "This isn't just about Marcus Tate. It's about whether this system can still bend toward what's right. The applause swelled again. But this time, it wasn't just noisy, it was a demand. The Vietnam vet stepped into the aisle, his voice booming. I served in Nam, and I've seen men like Marcus give everything. You don't get to spit on that, Judge. A young black man in the back, who'd been quiet until now, stood and added, This is bigger than one man. This is about all of us. Harlan's hands shook as he gripped the bench, his world unraveling. He'd miscalculated, thinking he could bully Marcus into submission, thinking the old rules of power still applied. But the room had shifted, and he was no longer the arbiter of truth. He cleared his throat, his voice barely audible. This court will recess. We'll reconvene tomorrow. The gavel fell, but no one listened. The room was alive, a chorus of voices, some cheering, others debating, all united by a shared hunger for something better. Sarah leaned down to Marcus, her eyes shining. You did it. You turned this room into a movement. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders easing for the first time in hours. I just told the truth, he said softly. Sometimes that's enough. As the crowd began to disperse, Lena rushed to Marcus, wrapping him in a hug so tight it felt like home. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. The Vietnam vet approached, extending a hand. You're a hell of a man, Tate. Semper Fi. Marcus shook his hand, their eyes meeting in a silent bond forged by sacrifice. The reporter, whose name was Emily, lingered, her notebook clutched to her chest. She approached Marcus, her voice tentative but earnest. Mr. Tate, your story, it's going to change things. Can I quote you? Marcus nodded, his voice steady. Tell them I fought for a country I still believe in, but it's got to start believing in us. The next day, the courtroom was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Word of Marcus's defiance had spread, fueled by Emily's article, which had gone viral overnight. The headline "Disabled Veterans Stand Shakes Georgia Court" had sparked protests outside, with signs reading "Justice for Marcus" and "End Bias Now." Inside, Harlan took the bench, his face drawn, his confidence eroded. He avoided Marcus's gaze, focusing instead on the papers before him. Sarah stood, her voice clear and commanding. Your Honor, in light of yesterday's events, we renew our motion for a mistrial and request your recusal. The integrity of this court has been compromised. The gallery murmured in agreement, and even the jurors nodded, their faces resolute. Harlan hesitated, his eyes scanning the room. He saw Keisha, the Vietnam vet, the young black man, the white woman, all of them watching, waiting, demanding. For the first time in his career, he felt the weight of their judgment. Ms. Coleman, he said, his voice low, your motion is granted. This case is dismissed, pending review by a new judge. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by cheers. Marcus closed his eyes, relief washing over him like a tide. But the fight wasn't over. As Marcus wheeled out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing. Emily pushed through, her voice rising above the din. Mr. Tate, what's next? Marcus paused, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, protesters, supporters, strangers who'd become allies. Next, he said, we keep fighting. For every man, woman, and child who's been told they don't belong. This country's worth it. Sarah walked beside him, her smile fierce. We'll take this to the appeals court if we have to. That officer, this system, they don't get to hide. Lena joined them, her arm around Marcus's shoulder, her pride a beacon. The Vietnam vet followed, his cap now in his hand, a gesture of respect. You ever need backup, Tate, you call me, he said, and Marcus nodded, a soldier's understanding passing between them. Outside, the sun was high, the Georgia heat unrelenting, but Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. The crowd parted for him, their voices a chorus of hope and anger, a reminder that change was hard-won but possible. Emily's article would spread further, sparking conversations in homes, churches, and town halls. The officer who'd arrested Marcus faced an investigation, his badge no longer a shield. Harlan's career teetered, his bias exposed for the world to see. As Marcus reached his van, he looked back at the courthouse, its stone facade no longer a monolith of fear, but a place where truth had won, if only for a day. He thought of his platoon, of the men he'd lost, of the country he'd bled for. This was why he'd fought not for flags or anthems, but for people, for the chance to be seen as equal. The story of Marcus Tate would linger, a spark that ignited debates about justice, race, and sacrifice. What do you believe? Does one man's stand change a system? Or is the fight just beginning? Share your voice because this story belongs to us all.